Hi everyone and welcome back. And what are we going to do in today's video? Well, this video is actually unusual in that it's kind of a prequel. So there's a video that's going to follow this where I'm actually going to repair some external Amiga floppy drives. This is one of them. Now, if you actually go on to watch that video, you'll see I get about halfway through it and I hit a situation where I need some new floppy drives because these drives are from probably back in the 80s or 90s, and they've given up the ghost. They're not working anymore. Now this one, like the other one, is actually pretty complex. You wouldn't probably find schematics for this, and repairing this would probably be too much work, to be honest. It's not a rare item. It's pretty much a commodity item from back in the 90s and early 2000s. So it just makes more sense to buy a new drive and actually put it in here and replace this broken drive. The problem is, you pretty much can't get new Amiga drives today. Well, you can't get new Amiga drives. They haven't been manufactured for decades. What you can get, though, are relatively newer PC drives, but they then require conversion. So that's actually what I've got in front of me here. We're going to take a quick look at these. And what we're actually going to do in this video is we're going to convert two of these from PC to Amiga. And we're going to go through how you do that. And I'm actually standing on the shoulders of giants with this. I've actually watched other videos where people have done this. I've also watched a couple of different blogs. And the reason why I've done that is because, in fact, there are many different drive mechanisms out there. This one's actually a Samsung drive. And I actually found this to be very easy to convert because it actually holds your hand to some degree in allowing you to make that conversion. I actually converted two of these, and one of these is actually currently in my Amiga 4000, and it works perfectly well in there. This drive here, let's have a look. It's usually on the chip or on the back here. This is a TEAC FD-235HF, and this one is looking at the board. Yeah, not that great. This isn't going to be that easy to convert. However, other people have done it before me, and there are guides out there. So what I'm going to do today is update those guides. I think I found one blog where somebody did it, and it was very pixelated, so it's probably from about 12, 15 years ago. So I'm going to do a slightly higher quality version of the graphics, not necessarily the guide itself. We're going to convert that. And this drive here, I believe, is an Alps. By the time you take the case off on this one, you end up with almost the bare mechanism, which is pretty cool. But this is an Alps, and this one's a little bit easier to do the part of the conversion, but most of it is a little bit tricky. But again, others have done conversions of these before. So yeah, we'll be looking at this. And I'm going to actually run you through how I converted this. And again, there are guides on the internet, not necessarily for this drive. So this will be interesting because this is slightly different from the guides which are available out there. And in this video, we'll go through how I got this working. It's almost the same as the guide, but there are slight differences. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to convert these two, and I'm going to show you how I converted this one. And then these then will be used in the next video to allow us to actually repair or complete the repair, hopefully, on those external Amiga floppy drives and get them usable again. So thanks to Jan Bater's video on converting PC drives to the Amiga, I first saw this table, and I did a search for Shurgard and PC floppy drive pinouts, and up came the same diagram. So it's a good diagram, so I'm going to reuse it, and it illustrates a couple of key points. On the left, you've got the Shurgard interface. Now, Shurgard was an employee of IBM, and eventually he left, and he actually pioneered floppy drives from microcomputers. I believe his company produced the first 5¼ drive, and it basically formed a standard in the industry for numerous years. And it also went on to spawn the SCSI standard, which is still in use today, really. It's sort of traveled all the way through to today, obviously with changes, but yeah. So Shurgard was a very, very important person in computer history, I suppose. So on the left is the standard that they defined, and on the right you've got the PC standard. And if you look at the pinouts between the two, they're actually very, very similar. But the PC did make some big changes, especially between pin 2 and pin 34. So if you look on the left-hand side, this is the shared guard interface, and this is actually the interface that the Amiga pretty much follows. And so what you're looking for on pin 2 is the Amiga is expecting to be connected to the disk change detect signal. And then on pin 34, it's expecting to be connected there to the ready signal. If we now look on the IBM PC side on the right-hand side, you can see that pin 2 is actually connected to the density select. So on the Amiga, there was only ever one density, and so we don't need that. Although we will look into actually forcing it to be the right density, which will mean that we don't have to fill in the sort of hole on high density disks to get them to be the right format for the Amiga. But yeah, right now on a PC, that would be wrong. It's the wrong connection. Amiga doesn't really care about it, and it's going to cause issues. If we go down to pin 34, you can see it's connected to the disk changed signal, which is wrong because it should be connected to the ready signal for the Amiga. Okay, so those are the two main changes we need to make. So I'll show you that we need to take pin 2 and swap it over and connect it to whatever pin 34 is connected to on the PC. And we also need to connect up pin 34 to the ready signal on the drive. Now, that's not always easy to find. Some drives, it's marked clearly. You'll see a pad which says ready or RD. And on some drives, you won't see anything like that. So we'll see that later. It actually can be quite tricky to work out where pin 34 should connect to. It's not vital because it's a kind of feature which is not used in most software. But still, if you want to get a drive to be as compatible as possible, you should try and connect a pin 34 to the ready signal if you can find it. On top of that, we also need to make changes to the disk select, and that's an important change. So let's have a quick look now at the Samsung board and we'll see what changes we made to that to get that to work. Okay, so we've zoomed in here on the Samsung drive. This has already been converted, which is why you'll see little sort of burn marks where the soldering iron has been in play. So let's actually show you what's going on here. I'm just going to darken the image a little bit so we can see a bit more. And I'm going to show you where currently, this is where pin 2 was connected to before I actually started working on this. And you can see that pin 2 is going to density select, which I assume is that solder blob at the top there. And it goes quite a short distance and it goes off into there. But in fact, we now want to connect that to what pins. We need to get pin 2 on the right-hand side there. We need to connect it up to the destination where pin 34 is actually going to there. So let me show you the connection that I made for pin 2. You can see I've basically, and obviously the wire is actually curving across there, but I've shown this as a straight line, yeah? So the wire is actually connected to the top pad of a pair of pads that would normally be connected together with a jumper. And the electrical connection goes directly from there to the pin that pin 34 was actually connected to when the drive is stock. So that does the conversion for pin 2. Pin 2 is now connected to the right place on that chip. Next, let's go and look at pin 34 again. This is how it starts off, but now we need to change it so it's actually connected to here. Okay, so what I've actually done is, you can see there, I've actually got a wire going across onto the pad to its left, and then basically that goes up and connects to the correct place on the chip above. Now, to make both of these work, if you look just north of pin 34, you can see there's a scratch on the board. That's where I've cut through the trace with a scalpel. And that's just to make sure that pin 34 is not actually connected to two things at the same time, because that would be bad. We don't want that. We don't want the original connection. We just want to have this new connection going up to the pin up there. And if we have a look at O2 as well, actually just above where the signal comes out of the board, you'll see there's a screw, and to the left of the screw there's a bit of a mark there. So that mark is where I've actually cut through, again, the trace going up to the pad above. And again, that's to ensure that pin 2 is not connected to two pins at the same time. So the last thing to look at is the connection of the jumper on disk select 1 or disk select 0. You can see that right now disk select 0 is actually jumpered. I've put a solder blob across the two pads. But originally, when I got this drive stock, it was actually DS1 that was connected. Now on a PC, DS1 would be the right thing to have because On a PC, you have a twist in the floppy drive cable, and that means that the first drive is seen as, let's say, disk ID 0, and then the second one is seen as disk ID 1. And on the Amiga, it needs to be DS0, and then the switching is done based on it being DS0. If you don't change it to DS0, you will find that the drive just doesn't react because it's not actually being addressed. So that's an important change to make as well. So that's basically all that was needed to get this drive to work as an Amiga drive. Now there is one more change that I could make, because when I was looking through some of the other tutorials on how to do this, I did see that it was possible to actually get the drive to identify always as the right kind of density for the Amiga. And to do that, you just basically ground the connection from density select, which was connected to pin 2. So let me just show that to you. You need to connect that to ground. What I'm showing here is a proposed idea. I'm not sure if this is really necessary, but those pins at the bottom on the connector, they are actually all ground. It's weird, but on the floppy drive connector, all of the bottom pins are actually ground. So pin 1, 3, 5, so on, all the odd pins, they're all ground. And then all the even pins, pin 2, 4, 6, and so on, they all actually have signals. If we were to connect that density select pad to ground, we may find that the disk, the cover that you would normally have to put onto the hole in one of the high density disks to make it work on the Amiga, you wouldn't actually need that because that would automatically be selected for you. So that's the Samsung drive. Let's take a look next at the Alps drive. Okay, so this is the Alps drive, and as we've just been talking about disk select, you'll see that on here we have DS0 and DS1 right next to each other, and you can see, if you look there, you can see it's actually just above the connector solder pads. And you can see that DS1 is currently soldered. So what we will need to do is we'll need to get some solder wick, and we'll actually need to remove the solder there. And then we need to bridge the connection between the pads on DS0 there. Then let's have a look at the original hard drive detect pin. So there we are. That's currently what it is. And then for pin 34, it is currently connected to pin 5, I believe it is, on the microchip. So what I'm planning to do here is, I think we need to connect pin 2 to where pin 34 is going to. So I think probably the best thing to do is to remove some of the solder mask on that trace in a place where it wouldn't cause any damage. And I think, honestly, the best place to do that is actually right next to pin 34. Do you see how it goes horizontally for quite a long distance there? I mean, I say it's a long distance. This is, we're zoomed in quite a lot here on the board. I think if I can remove the solder mask there and then put a blob of solder onto that trace, that would probably be the best place for me to actually then connect up the pin 5 up there. And then what we can do is we can cut the trace just before it connects to pin 34 there, and we'll verify that. And then what we need to do is we need to connect pin 34 to pin, well, it's a pad there. Do you see it says RD? It's very close to pin 34 there. RD is actually ready on this board as far as I'm aware. So let's have a look what that would look like. So pin 2 needs to connect up here to pin 5. We're not going to do it directly as I've shown here. We're actually going to go over to the left-hand side and connect it there, as I said, when we scrape off some of the solder mask. And then pin 34 needs to make a little short journey over to the ready pad there. And if we make those two changes, we should be good. Of course, we need to make sure that on pin 2, the trace that comes directly out of the top of that pad, it needs to be cut as well to make sure it doesn't connect to where it used to connect to. And then the last change I'm going to try is, do you see up there where it says 2HD? That, as far as I understand it, is the select that selects between high density and double density. So what we're going to do is we're going to ground that using that pad on the right there. That was the nearest ground connection I could find, actually, which is a bit strange. But we're going to go from there over to the HD, and hopefully that will then make the drive always be in the right density. So that's the Alps drive. And now let's take a quick look at the TEAC drive. So on this drive, do you see we have a jumper? And I call it a jumper. It's actually, it looks like a resistor, an SMD resistor. But if you notice, it has 0 ohms. That's actually equivalent to being a jumper. It's basically a pin. There's no resistance whatsoever. It's just effectively a piece of metal that connects those two pads together. So you can see that right now, the two pads for DS1 are connected. And what we need to do is we need to disconnect that SMD resistor there and actually flip it 90 degrees and actually have it so it connects up the two pads on DS0. And that will then get this drive set up to be used as DS0 on the Amiga. Next, we're going to look at what's happening with the pin 2. So you can see it's actually going a very short distance up there and it's connecting to that pad there. So I'm assuming that that is the density select pad. So we will try and do something with that a little bit later. So I'll just jump in there at this point because I actually went online and found the datasheet for this drive, which was quite lucky. And even better, I found the datasheet for a drive that seemed to be in the same range, but was a different model. And that drive had the ability to change to DS2 and 3. It had the ability to change pins 2 between disk change and ready, and the same thing for pin 34. So that particular drive seemed to be set up to easily modify it from being the original Shurgard specification or the PC specification. However, the drive that I actually have seems to be a cheaper model. Doesn't seem to have any of those features. And when I read through the spec sheet, I was disappointed to find that it didn't have any ability to change over things. So I'm not quite sure what that pin 2 actually connects to. I think it just connects to nothing right now. It's not connected. That's what it says in the spec sheet. Although it is actually connected up there to that pad. Obviously, you can see there's no jumper going across that pad. But as you can see right now, there is actually a jumper going on the pad to the right. That suggests to me that it's maybe already set up to be the right density that we need. And if it isn't, what we could try doing is desoldering that resistor that we see there. Well, as I said, it's not a resistor, it's really just a pin. We'll call it a jumper. And we'll move that jumper to the left, and then that may give us the density selection that we want to have. Unfortunately, it's not very well documented, this drive. I mean, it is well documented, but it doesn't really give you any hints as to what the signals connect to. There are no indications about where ready is, no indications where you should solder anything to get, high density disks and so on and so forth. So I think we might try it out a bit later, but I'm not guaranteeing it because we may run out of time. So anyway, let's get back to it. If we have a look at pin 34, you can see that it's currently connected to pin 1 on the chip up there, and it's following that trace. So we're going to wear away some of that solder mask on that trace there. And what we're going to do is we are going to then connect up a little blob of solder on that trace there. And then we are going to connect that up to pin 2. So let me just show you that. So that shows you a direct connection there between pin 2 and pin 1 on the chip. And as I said, I don't think I'm going to solder to the pin directly. I think I'm just going to scrape away some of the solder mask, as I said, and then we're going to actually solder onto the trace. But that shows you the connection that we need to make. We need to make a connection between pin 2 and pin 1 up there. And then for pin 34, we need to then go across over to S6. How did I know that? Because I actually read another tutorial on this and I found that out there on the internet. Somebody must have actually traced out the pins on the chip there, because as you can see on this particular board, it doesn't really use RD or ready or anything like that to indicate what the ready connection is. But the person who did that tutorial, it's a blog from, I think it was 2012, which I'll hopefully link to. They actually identified that S6, the left-hand pad, seems to be the ready signal. So we need to connect pin 34 over to the left-hand pad there. And I'll just explain why you actually need that ready signal. Actually, it's an interesting thing on the Amiga. You don't really need it most of the time. There's very little software that actually uses it, but apparently Xcopy does actually use it to do some of its copying methods. And I also understand there is certain software, I'm not sure if it's games or apps or something like that, but there's a few different pieces of software that require that ready signal to operate. But the vast majority of the software on the Amiga, it doesn't need it. So at the end of the day, the only thing you really need to get right is the disk change signal on pin 2. And you also need to make sure that disk select 0 is actually what's actually connected, not DS1. If you do those two things, you will find that the drive works. If you want full compatibility, you should really connect a pin 34 to the ready signal if you can find it. So anyway, with all of that said, let's move on now and actually do some soldering. And hopefully we won't make any mistakes and we'll get this done pretty cleanly. So let's have a crack at that now. But before we do that, let's have a quick word from our sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay, where you can make your tech dreams a reality. And now in PCBWay's new Project Share, you can upload your projects and share them with the community. And if you do use any of these projects, a percentage of the money that you pay will actually go to the author. So you can share your projects and you can also benefit the projects that others have shared on PCBWay. So if you do have any projects, why not upload them to PCBWay and get them out to the community? And of course, why don't you browse the project share and see if there's something there that's interesting for you? Because whether it's PCB prototyping, PCB assembly, 3D printing, or even CNC machining, PCBWay is the way. Starting with an instant quote for your PCB projects, PCBWay will leap into action, building your PCB, assembling it for you if you wish, and once it's passed their quality tests, it'll be winging its way to you in a flash. PCBWay, PCB prototyping the easy way. So hopefully in the middle of the screen there you can see a little mark, and I've actually got this knife here. I'll put it in frame for you. So basically that's the knife that I'm going to use to scrape away the solder mask there, and you can see that I've done a little bit. That's where that mark is, and what we're going to do is we're going to carry on and remove just enough of that so I can actually connect a blob of solder to it. That's what I want to do. I'm already starting to see hints of some copper showing through there. Now this knife is quite nice because it's sharp obviously, but the end is slightly blunt. I don't know if you can see there, there's a little sort of chip out of the end. And hopefully that will then mean that I'm not going to obviously wear away too much as I scrape away here. So I've got my jeweler's goggles on because this is very tiny actually. And I'm just going to scrape away, and I'm then going to use a cotton bud, this, to then just wipe away the powder that builds up, because it can be quite hard to see what you're actually doing. So here we go. There we are. You can see some bright copper showing through there. Hopefully you can see that. I think that'll be enough. We've got to be careful, obviously, that we don't actually break it, you know. Let's just do a little bit more. There we go. So there, hopefully you can see we've got a little, well, I can see it. I think from the camera, the copper isn't showing up quite as well. But we've definitely got a little section there of copper showing through. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on my multimeter and I'm going to set it to continuity mode. So let's just touch these together. Yeah. What I'm going to show is that pin 34 here connects to pin 5 here. There you are, see that? Now, what we're planning to do is we're planning to go from pin 2 over here over to here. And when we do that, we do not want this to have continuity, obviously, to pin 5 up here anymore. We want to have continuity from pin 2 to there to pin 5 there. So what we need to do now is we need to make a little cut here, close to, maybe in a spot here where it's easy enough to fix. And then in the future, if you ever did want to reverse this mod, which let's face it, isn't very likely, all you'd have to do is desolder the pin here and put a little wire between here and here. You need to have continuity back up to pin 5 on the chip up there. So that would be easy enough to do. So yeah, let's get the scalpel. Oh, well, in this case, it's a knife. It's a kind of packing knife, actually. I use it a lot. And I quite like it for this because it's a little bit more brutal than a scalpel, because that's what we need to be. So hopefully there you can see him going across the trace. Now, quite often you have to get quite deep with this to make sure that you actually do sever the connection. And obviously I can't see what I'm doing because as I do that, the solder mask is fluffing off. So I'm just going to brush it out of the way. There we are, cutting a bit deeper. Gentle but firm pressure. You don't want to slip and cut something else, especially yourself, obviously. Okay, seems reasonably deep, so let's just give it a try, see if that's done the job. I have a feeling it hasn't, but you never know. So between here and pin 5, nothing. No, nothing. Here, nothing. I'm going on the copper that I've scraped away. Yeah. So we do have continuity between here and pin 5, and we do not have continuity between pin 34 and pin 5 up here anymore. So hopefully now I can put a little blob of solder on there, and then we can actually put the wire across. I'll show you the wire I'm going to use. It's actually something I used on another job, but I took it off, and I'm just going to reuse it on this. It looks a little bit janky on the ends, but it's actually tinned on the ends. Let me put that in the camera. There it is. So you can see it's tinned on the end there, and on the other end it's tinned as well, actually. Tinned on both ends. Now then, it's actually a bit too long. So what I need to do is trim it down a bit. So let me do that. Let me just let's make a mark. I'm going to make it slightly sort of there, I suppose. You can raise up a bit. So just chop that. I'm just going to trim off the end. There we are. There's a little bit of wire there. That can go there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of solder blob on. So I'm going to turn on my soldering iron. It's an Aixun soldering iron. I've seen it reviewed on a couple of different channels, and I've had it for about 3 or 4 months now. What's really good about it has this really good power delivery. It's an Aixun T45. You might find a link to that in the description for this video if you want to get one yourself. I find it to be a great soldering iron, much better than the cheap and cheerful one I originally had. It's not an expensive one. It's actually relatively affordable. So definitely one I think that's worth going for. So firstly, what I'm going to do is, while we just get ready, let me get some flux. I've got a little tin of flux here. And I'm going to put some on the end of my solder. And then I'm going to put a little blob on pad 2, pin 2 I should say. So I'm going to put a little smidge of it on there. There we go. Then I'm going to put a little smidge on here as well, where that hole is in the solder mask. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to put a little bit fresh solder onto my iron. I'm going to clean it first, just using some copper wire for that. I'm going to put it next to pin 2. There we are. So that's refreshed that. I'm going to put a little blob on here. I'm going to put it next to here. And there we are. We've got a little spike there. It's not amazing, to be honest. It's not very big, but hopefully we'll be able to solder to that. Let's see. So I think the most difficult of the two solders will actually be onto that scraped away area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this on that area. Looks absolutely massive compared to it. It'll be a little bit tricky, so I'm going to bend it like this so I can present it better. So I've bent the wire at the end a little bit, and that means I can put it down flat next to here. What we're going to try and do now is we're going to try and solder this into this area here. So let's see what happens. It went on. That was good. So what we have now is we have this cable, and I need to present that to pin 2 here. We need to get that to solder on there. That should be quite neat. So I'm not going to put any more solder on. In fact, I'm going to clean it off. I'm just going to try presenting it up to here. It's pretty much exactly the right length, and I'm just going to try pushing it into here. Not quite. Let's try again. Let's put a little blob of solder on here just to help it. There we are. And on it goes, I think. So what I need to do now is clean off any residue on my soldering iron. I'm just going to turn off the soldering iron because I'm not going to use it for a couple of minutes, probably, as I check this. And now what we want to do is we just want to check the continuity between pin 2 and pin 5. So the first thing we need to check, do we have continuity between pin 2 and here? Obviously we do. And now pin 5 up here. Yes, we do. So that mod is done. That's great. The next thing I need to do is cut the connection between pin 2 and where it used to go to. We obviously want to make sure that there's no continuity there anymore. So what I want to do now is there's a little trace coming out of pin 2 here and going up here into this chip. We want to sever that because we obviously don't want that to have any continuity anymore. So first of all, let's check the continuity on that, where it goes to. So it looks like it goes up here. There we are, there's a pin here. I think it's the 6th pin along. So now we want to cut that. Let's give that a try. This is why you start seeing bits of fluff building up because of things like that. Still has continuity. Let's cut a bit more. So there we are. We don't have any more continuity. Pin 6 seems to be disconnected from there. Right, so the next thing we need to do is I'm going to desolder disk select 1 here. We need to change that to disk select 0 here. So we need to use some solder wick for that. So I'm going to turn on the iron, get up to temperature. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to put a little tiny wire between here and here. Unfortunately, it's very, very short. So this is going to be probably a little bit fiddly. Okay, so there's DS1 and there's DS0. Currently unconnected. We need to disconnect that and connect that. Disconnecting should be pretty easy. We've got some solder wick here. We just need to put it on and suck up the existing solder. Just making sure that we don't obviously melt that cable right next to it. That was that. Pretty much sure that is fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of flux on the end of the... Actually, no, I'm just going to go straight for this. I'm going to try and just solder this straight in. So going to the side slightly. Going to try and get on the 2 pads. No, that didn't go. No, it looks like I might need to put a little bit of flux. Actually, we've got a little blob there on the 2 pads. Just see if we can get it to bridge. Yeah, it looks like it bridged. So now we just need to check the continuity on those 2. And now I'm just going to check that we don't have continuity. I'm pretty sure we have continuity there. It's on the 2 pads. And here we do not. Obviously here we do. So we should have now this set up as disk 0. And just checking nothing has gone wrong with this in the meantime. Yeah. Still have continuity there. So all we have to do now to finish this mod, the basic version of it, is we just need to connect 34 there to RD there. Now, I would say the best thing to do is to get RD connected first and then put the wire over there and connect it to there. So I need to go from there to there. It's almost nothing really. It would almost be a completely bare wire actually. So let me just clip it a bit longer. There we are. What I'm going to try and do is just trim off a tiny amount. So I'm going to try and make this a little bit so that we have a very small amount of copper wire showing at either end with a bit of insulation in between, just to make it sturdy, you know. And then at either end, hopefully. Yes, this one's actually quite fiddly because it's such a short distance, you know. So we need to go from there to there. It's just about right. So let's try putting a bit of flux on either end. Well, that's going to make it a bit messy, but we have to do that. There we are. They've melded together. And I'm going to put a big blob of solder on that ready pad again. And then hopefully we'll put some, there we are. We'll try and put some flux on this wire. Put quite a large amount actually. There we are. I mean, this looks ridiculous, but I'm just trying to get some in the right area. Some on the actual cable itself. There we go. What we're going to do now is we're going to try and get the two to be friends. Okay, so let's bend it over. I think we have it. Let's test it. You know, the bad thing about this cable is it's very thick, really, considering the size I'm trying to do it. But the good thing is, because it's raw copper inside, you don't have the problem with the magnet wire where sometimes it doesn't actually melt through the enamel coating. And that can be a real problem sometimes because you think you've got a connection. I mean, you have the wire completely embedded in the solder. What happens is when you actually test the continuity, there isn't any because it's actually still insulated. So if I try and touch the pad itself, so I'm not touching that wire there, I'm touching. So 34 is now connected to ready, and 2 is connected to pin 5 here. There we are, still doing that. And that's basically it for the simple version of this. So there is obviously the option of also soldering up 2 HD here, which I've been told actually will make this into the correct density for the Amiga. But I'm going to test it first before I do that, just make sure everything's fine. And if everything is fine, then I can actually then test that in isolation. I don't want to have too many things to test in one go. So that would need to be connected if I did go ahead from here over to here, because this was the only ground that I could find in any kind of proximity. But that's to be tested out later. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this drive and put it on the Amiga 2000 and test it and see if it's actually working. So I took this drive to my Amiga 2000 and there I have the external floppy drive that we're going to look at in the next video. That allowed me to easily plug this in and out because I could actually plug it into the external drive enclosure and test it. I plugged it in, put in a known good disk, it was a cover disk, and it read that perfectly fine. Then I tried to format a disk. Now the disks that I have, they're actually high density disks, which are not really natively compatible with the Amiga because it's double density. But you can put tape over the high density hole and then that will make the drive treat it as if it is a double density disk. And when I did that, I found that I actually could format the disks. Without it, you couldn't format the disks. It would come up with an error saying that it couldn't find cylinder 0. So it was possible to actually read disks perfectly well. You could format disks as long as you taped over the high density hole on the disks. So that was perfectly fine. But as I mentioned earlier, there was a mention in the blog that if I was to take this pad here, which says 2HD, and connect it to ground, there is actually a ground pad here, then that would pull that to ground and that would force the drive to treat all disks as if they were double density disks. It wouldn't do the auto detection basically. So I thought that was worth a try. And what I've done off camera, you can actually see it here, is I've got some more of the cable and I've got a connection here between, as I said, ground. And I toned that out earlier. I'll actually show you that actually, just to show you. So all of these pins here are ground. If I go in here, let's just make sure that's working. Sometimes I find on these that it doesn't make, there we are. So yeah, that is actually ground. And then it was a case of testing it again. Took it back in, plugged it back into the enclosure. What I found was that when I put a high density disk in, which didn't have the hole covered up, the drive still formatted the disk as if it were a double density disk. So that was fantastic. It's a bit of a pain to have to tape over those holes. I think it's just easier on an Amiga that you can put in a high density disk and just format it and use it as if it was a double density disk. That has made this particular drive very, very good because now it works. And on top of that, you don't have to fiddle around putting tape over the holes. So that's a really good success here for the Alps drive. What we're going to do now is we're going to move on and we're going to look at the TEAC drive. Not sure if I'm going to be able to do this mod on the TEAC drive. Nothing on the silk screen actually shows anything that says HD or anything like that. It's the problem with that drive is that because it's like this cheap model, which they didn't really want people to be able to modify, they seem to have made an effort as well to kind of obfuscate what the different pads do. It's going to be very tricky. However, there is a pair of jumpers on that board, which kind of suggests to me that it might be the same as this. So we might try that. We might try moving that one of the jumpers around, and once we verify that the drive works on a fundamental level, and we'll see if that works there. So this drive is pretty much going to be a rinse and repeat of the last one. The only difference is we have to take it on advice from the tutorial that I found that it's the S6 pin that I need to solder to here for pin 34 to connect it to ready. Pin 2 simply needs to connect to the same connection on here as pin 34. And for that, I've already scraped away a little bit of the solder mask there so I can make a connection, just like we did on the last drive. There's no real sort of mystery in that. So I'm just going to check that. So I'm going to touch on pin 34. Oh, there we go. So there we go. We have continuity. So what I need to do is then break that continuity between pin 34 and where it goes to on the chip up here. So it's pin 1. There we are. So what I need to do now is cut through the trace just before it comes out of the pad. Well, just after it comes out of the pad, sorry. So I'm going to have to be very careful on this one because the traces are closer together. I'm going to hold the board here because I'm putting quite a lot of pressure on it and I don't want it to break. Okay, that's quite a lot. Let's just brush this off so we can see it. And let's just try the continuity. Nope. Actually getting it anywhere. Like I said, I think that flux is having an effect. Let me just try and mop it off. We'll put it back on later. There we are. Don't seem to get continuity on it. Maybe the pins on my probes have got a bit dirty. Let's try cleaning them. There we go. Okay, we have continuity between here and here. And then between here we do not. I think I've actually broken it already. Yeah, looks like that's cut. Okay, let's do the same thing for pad 2. So pad 2, we don't really need to do anything on that, and that's because it's not actually connected. So we're just going to leave that as is. So I'm going to go back over here to the scratch, and we're going to put some solder on there to try and tin that up. Turn on the soldering iron. I'm just going to try and put a little bit of flux there. There we go. Okay, let's see if we can get that to tin up. It's very, very small, so I have to be quite careful with this. Nope, that didn't work. Let's try the other angle. There we are. It's just the flux that actually burnt there a bit. Just put that on there. Okay. I'm going to put a little blob on the iron, and then I'm going to present it to that small area there. Yeah, it's not working very well this time. Okay, let's get the wire that I prepared. So I've got a wire that's going to go from here to here, hopefully. So let's see if we can get that to actually solder on. It's going to be very tricky, this. I'm going to bend the wire up so it goes flat onto the surface. Okay, let's see if we can get this to tack on. It's going to be very difficult, I think. Oh, I think we got it. Right then, so now the other end. Yeah. This is a bit problematic. Can you see the wire there might actually make contact? So I might have to TEAC this. It's a pain because it was pretty much perfect. Yeah, that seems all right. That seems fine. So let's check it. Just make sure we got continuity. What we're hoping for is continuity between 2 and pin 1 on the chip. So first of all, we'll check, well, it's going to be continuity here, isn't it? So let's go over here. Yep, that's great. Right then, the next thing is we need to get a wire from pin 34 here over to pad, the left pad here of 36. Again, I've cut a wire already. And let's see what we have to do to get this to work. So it looks like this is actually quite long. So I'm going to put this so the base touches here, and then I'm going to solder that on there, and then I'm going to trim any off on the end to make sure it doesn't make any further contact. So let me just double check that before I do it. Yeah, that there, just touching, and then that goes long enough to go to there. Or should we do it the other way? No, yeah, we'll do it like that. The first thing I need to do is put a bit of extra solder on the pad. Here. There we are, it's a big blob. Now we need to do the same thing here. Just have to go with that, I think. Doesn't really want to do much more. Okay, so I'm going to go here. So hopefully we can get this to tack on. I think that's good. Yeah, now we're going to go here. There we go. And this is overshooting a little bit here, and that will actually cause a connection on the other pad. This one here is fine. So I'm just going to turn off the iron. I'm just going to trim those down a bit. Okay, there we go. So that looks pretty good. When I was cutting this off, I did notice that maybe I severed the pads, the connection between the two pads, but I believe it's not necessary. So we'll see. We'll just make sure that's okay. Remember, this is the ready signal, so it's not that necessary. But this connection here is definitely fine. And there's one last thing we need to do is we need to reverse this jumper here. Now that's very tricky to do, so I'm going to try and do it on camera, but you may not keep sight of the actual work while I do it because it's going to be very difficult to do this and film it at the same time. So let me have a go at that. Turn on the iron. And if I can't get the jumper to go across, what I'll do is I'll just use the solder blob instead. Same thing, basically. So the first thing we need to do is get this off. So I'm just going to touch both ends. There we are. I've got it off. I just need to get it off the actual soldering iron. So now what I'm going to do is pick it up and put it in the right position there. Before I do that, let me put some new solder on those pads, just to make sure it has something new to adhere to. Yep, that's good. Okay, now let's get that jumper. Hopefully it's not attached to this screw. No, it's not. It's very, very fiddly. It's about 2 millimeters long, something like that. It's stuck to the end of my tweezers. Unfortunately, I do not have a microscope. It's a bit... There we are, it's almost in position, but it needs to be moved a little bit. That's not bad. A lot of fiddling around to get that. That's actually pretty good. It's looking pretty reasonable. We'll just check the continuity at both ends. It should be fine. Yeah, that's fine. Let's check the continuity on this. Yeah, and then this. Okay, good. It has its connection for the disk change, and it has its connection for ready. So let's give this a try and see how functional it is. So I went and I tried this drive out on the Amiga 2000 again. Worked perfectly fine. And then I thought what I would do is I would try and move the resistor there over into the position next to it, just to see if it could actually get the high density or double density selection to be fixed to be double density, and it didn't work. There does seem to be a little sort of network going here and going over here, but without sort of schematics, you know, some kind of guidance, it's very difficult to work out what you would do with that to actually make it so that it's double density all the time. So right now, this drive does actually work. It does read double density disks on an Amiga. It does work on the external enclosure, which is what it's intended to be used for. But disappointingly, any disks that are high density, which I use in this drive, for them to be formatable, not readable, it does read them as double density, I would have to put some tape on the high density selection hole. So that's a little bit unfortunate, but that's the way the cookie crumbles on this particular drive. But I'm happy because if you watch most guides on the internet, they don't even cover that whatsoever. So maybe in the future with some guidance, maybe there are other people out there who've done conversions on this and have spent a long time, you know, scoping things out. We might be able to find out what it is exactly we need to do on this drive to actually get it to be double density all the time, because that would be great. So you can just use, you know, high density disks directly in the drive and have them treated as if they're double density. Anyway, that's looking good. So let's wrap up. Right, so we have 3 drives all converted to work on the Amiga, and I'm going to demonstrate that. I'm not going to demonstrate this drive. This is the Samsung drive that we showed earlier. This actually works, and I did get into a bit of an off-camera rabbit hole with this because I tried to get this drive to work to be hardwired to actually only accept, or rather to only think that disks like this, which is a HD disk, would actually then be recognized as a double density disk. And what the advantage of that is, you don't have to cover up this hole here. You could just pop this disk in. Well, actually, you could pop it in this end, pop this in, and then you could format it without having to put any tape over it, which is just a little bit more convenient on the Amiga. I found the actual guide from Samsung as to what the different things did, and there were 2 particular pads, well, 2 pairs of pads actually, Op A and Op B, and apparently if those connected in different combinations, the drive will act in different density modes. But the only thing I couldn't quite grok is that it looked like those pads were meant to work in conjunction with pin 2 still being connected to density select, so that, you know, when the, let's say the PC sent the right signal, it would then act accordingly. And it would either go between 1 megabyte disks or 2 megabyte disks. Anyway, long story short, I tried putting jumpers or, you know, doing solder connections between Op A and Op B. And I didn't find any effect on the drive. It wouldn't actually read a HD disk as if it were double density. So bit of a pity. I do have an idea, which is that it's possible that either of those pads, and I'm not quite sure at which side, if I were to connect either of those pads to ground or to 5 volts, that then might force a signal to be, for instance, double density. So that's something I'm going to try out in the future. And if you have one of these drives, it's an SFD, Samsung SFD-231B, then obviously you could try that yourself and see if that gives you any joy. I'm sure there's gold in them there hills. I think that Op A or Op B, one of the pads, if connected to ground or 5 volts, may actually get you that extra ability, which, yeah, I couldn't get quite working. So this is probably the most successful one, which is the Alps drive. And the nice thing about this drive is that it can actually take HD disks and treat them as if they were double density disks. So I'm going to quickly demo that. So let's connect this at the back. And I put it back in its case. That's so I just avoid shorting it out. Let's turn on the monitor. It's a grunt from the drive, shows it's basically got power. Just wait for it to boot up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this in. This will be the first test to show that it actually reads a disk. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pop this in without any tape on it, and we will then try and get it to format a disk. It should actually work with this one. So let's see. There you go. It now reads Amiga disks. Well, it always did. It just needed to be adjusted. And now we'll pop this disk in. Okay, let's try formatting it. There you go. It's a HD disk. It should actually refuse to work, but because of that connection that we made earlier, it now will actually treat HD disks as if they're a double density disk. And that was the kind of holy grail that I was trying to achieve with a Samsung disk. I tried to do the same thing again with this disk, which is the TEAC FD-235HF. Of all the disks, this was the actual hardest one to convert anyway, because it had, I think the silk screen didn't really tell you anything about the pins. Luckily, there was a blog out there which actually got me to the point where I could actually convert it to work to read Amiga disks. It will format high density disks. You just need to put some tape on them. So let me just get a disk, and I'll demo that in a second once this is finished formatting. So when I was testing things out earlier, I actually put tape on these. You can see I put some black tape. This is actually kind of thick tape, a bit like duct tape. I just had that lying around and I gave that a try. It does work, that tape, but I did find it sometimes gets stuck in the mechanism, so I won't use this right now. This one has got sort of packing tape, very similar to cello tape or, gift tape, very thin tape. So as we saw, this disk reads perfectly fine. It also formats HD disks without having to put any tape on them. So this is actually the nicest drive actually in terms of ease of use. So next, let's unplug this. So this will be used definitely in the next video, where we will put this in this enclosure here. And let's put the TEAC in. I had a bit of a moment last night when I was going to sleep, and I was just trying to think, is it TEAC or is it TEAC? I was wondering if it was named after the wood for some reason. I don't know why. But I don't think it is. Anyway, there we go. Let's turn it on. And there's a little grunt from it. Shows it's got power going to it and it's working fine. So we'll just wait for it to boot up, and then we're going to do the same test again. We're going to put this in, and let me pop this disk out. I'm going to try and format this disk. Should be readable, I think. Should treat it like it's a normal disk now, but we'll see. If not, it's because of this. So yeah, let's give it a try. So first of all, normal Amiga double density disk, and this should work fine. There we go, that's fine. Next, high density disk without the high density hole covered. As you can see, it says it's empty, and it works normally. So it's weird that you can read, and I think you can write as well. Let's try writing to this actually. Let's go to utils. Let's just get a small file. I think I've got, where is it? No click, yeah, that's quite small. Let's drop that on there. There you go. So although it can read it fine, it doesn't look like it can actually write to it fine. So for this drive to actually work really with high density disks, I would actually have to use tape. So just trying to get out of this. Well, Workbench really takes a lot of giving up, doesn't it? It doesn't want to give up. Yeah, there we go. It finally gave up. So if I put some tape on that, it should work fully. So I'll test that now. So yeah, can work with these disks, but you do need to put some tape on here. Here's a disk with some tape on it. Pop that in. There we are, it's empty. I'm just going to show that you can format it. Format the disk. Format. There we are, it's chugging away perfectly fine. So yeah, as we saw, the double density disks, if you can get these, then they will work perfectly fine in these drives. You won't have to make any modifications. Well, you don't need to worry about it, basically just use these and these are perfectly fine. If you find that you can only get HT disks, which is, these are they tend to be more common these days because these were the disks that were in manufacture when floppy drives basically started to become obsolete. So you do find stocks of these still around. These are actually new old stock discs, which I was very lucky to get verbatim, which is really cool. Yeah, so basically, this drive and this drive, they're both perfectly usable in the enclosures that I've got, which we're going to look at in the next video, put it all back together there. But it's really cool that you can, convert so many different drives. This is a very common one, actually, to convert. The only problem I found was that the data connection is on the left-hand side, and then the power connection is on the right-hand side. And in both of my external enclosures, it was the other way around. And I believe internally, originally on the Amiga, it was the other way around as well. However, if you're going to use this internally on an Amiga, like an Amiga 4000, this being the other way around isn't really a big problem these days because the floppy cable will actually reach. And the power cable, if you get an extension off a Molex, will reach perfectly fine. So I've actually got one of these being used in my Amiga 4000 and it works really well. So yeah, they're both, they're all good solutions. Just to show that it's a fully working disk, I'll actually copy that file onto it. There we are. So there's no click. We're going to drop that on there. It's actually pretty tiny. So if we open that up, we show all files. There it is, no click. So perfectly functional as long as you use some tape on a HD disk. So I hope that was useful to you. It was certainly useful to me because I had to make these conversions for use in the following video. I had these external drive enclosures. I really needed some new drives in there because both of the drives were problematic. This one actually is still functional, but has a problem with the eject button. It's getting very mechanically weak, and I'm going to have to put some putty on this to try and fix it, which we may do in the next video. And that would actually then make this usable for the future. So I think I will do that because this was working at least some of the time. Originally, when I tested it, it wasn't. Yeah, this probably needs a little bit of work. So I hope that was useful to you. And if it was, then please watch the next video where we actually put these to use in my external drive enclosures. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, then please click on the like button. Please give the like button a donk because that will help this video to get promoted to other people. I do understand that this type of video has been around before. I only made it myself because I had to convert literally 3 different drive types. And I thought that might be useful to combine those together into one location that may be useful to people in the future. If you did find this video useful, then please subscribe and please click on the bell button so you get notifications. A lot of our viewers actually do subscribe, but they fail to click on the notification button, which means they don't find out about our new videos when they come out. So please do that if you can. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next video where we put these to use. Until then, take care.